Special Agent Maya Carter stepped out of her car, adjusting the collar of her crisp FBI jacket as she surveyed the quiet southern town. The sun was just beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the empty streets. It wasn't the bustling city life she was used to, but this small town held secrets darker than she had imagined. Assigned to lead an investigation into a string of racially motivated crimes, Maya knew it wouldn't be easy. But what she didn't expect was how much resistance would come from within the very people meant to assist her. The local police station looked like something out of an old movie. Brick walls, faded paint, and a creaky wooden door that groaned when pushed open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and stale paper. A few officers glanced up from their desks as Maya entered, her confident stride drawing curious stares. She could feel the weight of their gazes, some curious, others skeptical. One man in particular stood out, a tall, broad-shouldered deputy with sharp eyes and a scowl etched onto his face. That was Deputy Rick Hargrove. Hargrove had been with the department for over 2 decades, and everyone knew he didn't take kindly to outsiders. His reputation preceded him. He was blunt, abrasive, and unapologetically set in his ways. As Maya introduced herself to the room, shaking hands with a few polite nods from the officers, Hargrove lingered at the back, arms crossed, watching her every move like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Agent Carter," said Sheriff Daniels, a graying man with a warm smile who seemed genuinely relieved to have federal help. "We're glad to have you here. This case has us all stretched thin." Maya nodded politely, offering a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'm looking forward to working with your team." Her voice carried authority, yet warmth, a balance she'd perfected over years in law enforcement. But before anyone else could speak, Hargrove stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. "Working with her," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "She looks more suited for desk work than chasing down criminals around here." The room fell silent. Maya turned slowly to face him, her expression calm despite the sting of his words. "Deputy Hargrove, is it?" she asked evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I assure you, my qualifications speak for themselves. If you'd like, we can compare arrest records later." A few officers stifled smirks, though most avoided making eye contact altogether. Hargrove's jaw tightened, clearly annoyed by her composure. "Let's hope those qualifications include knowing how things work around here," he shot back. "This isn't Washington, Agent Carter. We don't need someone coming in and telling us how to do our jobs." Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him with a mix of curiosity and patience. "Then I guess we'll both learn something new, won't we?" Her calm response only seemed to irritate Hargrove further, but he didn't push the issue, at least not yet. For now, he retreated to his corner, muttering under his breath, while Maya focused on reviewing the case files spread across the table. Though outwardly composed, Maya couldn't ignore the tension simmering beneath the surface. She'd faced prejudice before. It came with the territory of being a black woman in a field dominated by men. But something about Hargrove felt different, more personal, almost deliberate. As the evening wore on, Maya pored over the evidence, piecing together clues that hinted at a deeply rooted hatred lurking in the town's shadows. Despite the hostility she sensed, she reminded herself why she was there: to bring justice to those who deserved it. And no amount of petty remarks or condescension would stop her from doing her job. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The next morning, Maya arrived at the station early, determined to make progress despite the icy reception she'd received the day before. She carried a stack of fresh reports and a map marked with potential locations linked to the case. Her focus was razor sharp, but as she entered the briefing room, she noticed Deputy Hargrove already seated at the table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. His feet were propped up on the edge of the desk, and his chair leaned back precariously, a posture that screamed indifference. "Morning," Maya said briskly, setting her files down. "I've gone over the evidence again, and I think we need to prioritize these areas." She pointed to the map, her finger tracing circles around key spots. "If we act quickly, We might catch one of the suspects off guard. Hargrove barely glanced at the map. Instead, he let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You really think you can just waltz in here and tell us how to handle things? We've been dealing with this town longer than you've had that badge. Maya took a deep breath, refusing to let his tone rattle her. Deputy Hargrove, I'm not here to step on anyone's toes. I'm here because this department requested federal assistance. If we work together, we'll get results faster. Work together. Hargrove scoffed, finally lowering his feet to the ground. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Listen, Agent Carter, or whatever your name is, you don't know the first thing about this place. These streets. They're mine. This community. It's mine. You're just another outsider trying to play hero. His words hung heavy in the air, laced with thinly veiled hostility. Maya clenched her jaw for a moment but forced herself to remain calm. With all due respect, Deputy, solving crimes isn't about ownership. It's about getting justice for the victims. And right now, we're wasting time arguing instead of acting. But Hargrove wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed as he leaned even closer, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper loud enough for others nearby to hear. You see, sweetheart, maybe if you spent less time worrying about looking good for the cameras and more time understanding real police work, you'd realize why no one takes you seriously. The room went silent. A few officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Maya felt the heat rising in her chest, but she swallowed it down, reminding herself of the bigger picture. Losing her temper wouldn't help, proving him wrong would. Instead of retaliating, she straightened up, meeting his gaze head-on. If questioning my abilities makes you feel better about yourself, go ahead. But when this case gets solved, and it will get solved, I expect you to acknowledge who actually did the work. Before Hargrove could respond, Sheriff Daniels walked in, breaking the tension. All right, folks, let's focus. We've got a job to do. He shot a warning glance at Hargrove, who reluctantly sat back in his chair, still fuming. As the meeting continued, Maya outlined her strategy, explaining each step clearly and logically. Most of the officers nodded along, impressed by her thoroughness. But Hargrove remained unimpressed, rolling his eyes whenever she spoke. When the briefing ended, he muttered something under his breath about city slickers as he stormed out of the room. Later that afternoon, Maya found herself paired with Hargrove for a stakeout near an abandoned warehouse suspected of being a hideout for one of the suspects. Sitting side by side in the cramped car, the tension between them was palpable. Hargrove tapped his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel, while Maya scanned the area through binoculars. You know, he said after a long silence, this whole operation reeks of desperation. You're chasing ghosts. And what would you suggest we do instead? Maya asked coolly, keeping her eyes trained on the building. Sit around waiting for another attack. Hargrove shrugged. Sometimes doing nothing is smarter than rushing in blind. Maya didn't respond. She knew better than to engage further. But as the hours dragged on, she couldn't shake the feeling that Hargrove's arrogance wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. And sooner or later, it would cost them dearly. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the abandoned warehouse in shadows that danced eerily under the flickering streetlights. Maya sat silently in the passenger seat of the unmarked car, her focus sharp as she scanned the area through her binoculars. Beside her, Deputy Hargrove slouched in his seat, arms crossed and jaw tight, radiating frustration. The air inside the car was thick with tension, a mix of boredom and simmering resentment. Still nothing, Hargrove muttered after another hour passed without activity. Waste of time, if you ask me. Maya ignored him, her eyes glued to the warehouse entrance. She had studied the patterns of the suspects carefully, the timing of their movements, the routes they favored. And this location fit perfectly. But patience was key, and Maya knew better than to rush into anything without solid evidence. Unfortunately, Hargrove didn't share her discipline. We've been sitting here for hours, He grumbled again, louder this time. This isn't how real cops operate. You're just wasting resources. Maya finally lowered the binoculars and turned to face him, her voice calm but firm. Deputy Hargrove, I understand your frustration, but we have protocols for a reason. If we move too soon or make noise, we risk losing them entirely. Hargrove rolled his eyes dramatically. Protocols. Spare me the lecture. I've been doing this job longer than you've been alive. Trust me, these guys aren't showing up tonight. Ignoring his dismissive tone, Maya raised the binoculars once more. Just then, movement caught her eye. A figure slipping around the corner of the building, barely visible in the dim light. Her heart quickened. There, she whispered urgently, pointing toward the spot. Do you see that? Hargrove squinted lazily out the window. See what? Probably just some kid sneaking around. It's not a kid, Maya insisted, her voice low but urgent. That matches the description of one of our suspects. We need to call for backup now Before she could finish, Hargrove interrupted with an exaggerated sigh. Call for backup. Seriously. Over a shadow. Look, Agent Carter, I'm not calling anyone until I'm sure there's something worth chasing. Maya clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath her composed exterior. You're letting your ego get in the way of the investigation. This is exactly why cases fall apart, because people refuse to act when it matters. And this is why agents like you fail, Hargrove shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. You think you're so smart, coming in here with your fancy degrees and your polished shoes, but you don't know the first thing about real policing. You're all talk and no action. The insult stung, but Maya refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she grabbed the radio and called the dispatch herself, requesting immediate support. Hargrove snatched the device from her hand, glaring at her. I said no. We're not mobilizing half the force over nothing. For a moment, they locked eyes, the tension between them electrifying. Then, without warning, the figure reappeared, this time closer, carrying what looked like a duffel bag. Maya's instincts screamed that this was their chance. She reached for the door handle, ready to confront the suspect directly if necessary. What are you doing? Hargrove hissed, grabbing her arm. Are you insane? You can't just go running off like some reckless rookie. I'm doing my job, Maya snapped, pulling free from his grip. Which is more than I can say for you. She stepped out of the car, her movements deliberate and controlled. By the time Hargrove scrambled after her, shouting protests, the figure had vanished into the darkness. Maya scanned the area frantically, but it was too late. They'd lost their opportunity. Furious, she spun around to face Hargrove, who stood a few feet away, hands on his hips, looking smug. Congratulations, she said icily. Your refusal to follow protocol just cost us a lead. I hope you're proud of yourself. Hargrove smirked, unfazed by her anger. Oh, please, don't pin this on me. If you hadn't been so eager to play hero, maybe we wouldn't be standing here empty-handed. Maya stared at him, her chest rising and falling with restrained fury. For a fleeting second, she considered laying into him, unleashing every ounce of frustration she bottled up since arriving in this town. But something stopped her, a quiet realization that giving in to anger would only prove him right. Instead, she took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and walked back to the car without another word. Every step felt heavy, not because of defeat, but because she knew the stakes were higher than ever. And while Hargrove might have thought he'd won this round, Maya vowed silently that the next move would be hers, and it would leave no room for doubt. Back at the station, Maya sat alone in the dimly lit conference room, the weight of the night's failure pressing down on her. The fluorescent light above flickered faintly, casting an uneven glow over the scattered papers and maps spread across the table. She replayed the events in her mind. The shadowy figure slipping away, Hargrove's stubborn refusal to act, and her own decision to step out of the car despite his protests. Each moment felt like a missed opportunity, but she refused to let frustration consume her. Instead, she channeled it into focus. Maya leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She thought about Hargrove's words, the way he had dismissed her as inexperienced and incapable. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her because of her race or gender, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But Maya knew something Hargrove didn't. True strength wasn't about proving others wrong in the heat of the moment. It was about staying steady when the odds were stacked against you. And right now, the odds were very much against her. She opened her eyes and began sifting through the case files again, this time with renewed determination. If Hargrove wanted to doubt her methods, fine. Let him. But she would show him, and everyone else, that results spoke louder than words. As she pored over the evidence, one detail caught her attention. A series of phone records tied to a local business owner who had previously been flagged as a person of interest. Something about the pattern seemed off, almost too clean. Most investigators might have overlooked it, assuming it was irrelevant, but Maya's instincts told her otherwise. Hours passed as she dug deeper, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up archive reports and connecting dots that others had missed. Slowly but surely, a clearer picture began to emerge. The suspect they had lost tonight wasn't acting alone. There was a network, a web of connections that stretched further than anyone had anticipated. And at the center of it all, someone close to home. By the time morning light filtered through the blinds, Maya had uncovered something significant, a link between one of the suspects and Deputy Hargrove's family. Not directly, of course. Nothing so blatant, but enough to raise serious questions. A cousin of Hargrove's late wife had been mentioned in several witness statements, always lingering on the periphery of the crimes. At first glance, it seemed coincidental, but given the context, it was impossible to ignore. Maya stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. This changed everything. Confronting Hargrove wouldn't just embarrass him. It could implicate someone he cared about deeply. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she was ready to take that step. But then she reminded herself why she was here. Not to win arguments or settle scores, but to bring justice to those who had been hurt. Personal feelings didn't matter. The truth did. When Hargrove arrived at the station later that morning, he strutted in as usual, coffee in hand, expecting another day of resistance from the FBI agent. What he didn't expect was Maya waiting for him in the hallway, a folder tucked under her arm and a steely glint in her eye. "Deputy Hargrove," she said evenly, stepping into his path. "We need to talk." He stopped short, raising an eyebrow. "About what now? Another wild goose chase?" "No," Maya replied, her voice calm but firm. "About your family." Hargrove's expression shifted instantly, his casual smirk fading into something harder, more guarded. "What about my family?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Maya held up the folder. "There's a connection we can't ignore. I think you know what I'm talking about." For once, Hargrove didn't have a snide remark ready. He stood frozen, staring at her, his face unreadable. In that moment, Maya realized something important. While she had been working tirelessly to prove herself, Hargrove had been operating out of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of change, fear of losing control. And though she still couldn't trust him, she understood him a little better. As they walked toward the briefing room to discuss the revelation, Maya felt a strange sense of clarity. Silence, she realized, could be a powerful weapon. By choosing not to react impulsively, she had uncovered the truth. And now, the ball was firmly in Hargrove's court. The briefing room felt smaller than usual as Maya and Hargrove faced each other across the table, the folder sitting between them like a ticking time bomb. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. Hargrove's usual bravado had vanished, replaced by a mix of anger and unease. His jaw tightened as he stared at the documents Maya had laid out in front of him. Photocopies of witness statements, phone records, and surveillance photos connecting his late wife's cousin to the suspects. "This is nonsense," Hargrove finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was gruff, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind his words. "You're grasping at straws just to make me look bad." Maya didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Deputy Hargrove, I'm not here to attack you or your family, but these connections are real, and we can't ignore them. If we want to solve this case and clear any suspicion, you need to cooperate." Hargrove pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. He paced the room, running a hand through his thinning hair. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked vulnerable, unsure of himself. "You think I don't know how this looks? You think I haven't already thought about it?" He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "But you're wrong. My family has nothing to do with this. Nothing." Maya held his gaze, letting the weight of his denial hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Then help me prove it. Tell me what you know about your wife's cousin. Anything that might explain why his name keeps coming up." Hargrove hesitated, clearly torn. On one hand, his pride screamed at him to shut down the conversation entirely, to deny everything and walk away. But on the other, something deeper, a flicker of guilt or responsibility, kept him rooted to the spot. Finally, he sank back into his chair, exhaling sharply. "Fine," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "His name's Jake. He's complicated. After my wife passed, he kind of drifted, got mixed up with the wrong crowd, started doing odd jobs for people around town. But I never thought." His voice trailed off, the weight of his own doubts settling over him. Maya nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. "Did he ever mention anyone specific? Someone who might have pulled him into this?" Hargrove shook his head. "Not directly. But there were rumors. People said he was working with some guys from out of state, big players. That's all I know. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before." Maya jotted down notes quickly, her mind racing with possibilities. This new information could be the break they needed to close in on the suspects. But even as she processed the details, she couldn't ignore the emotional toll this was taking on Hargrove. His defensiveness had shifted into something raw and exposed, a crack in the armor he'd worn so proudly. "You didn't cause this," Maya said softly after a pause, surprising even herself with the empathy in her tone. "But if you want to make things right, for your family and for this town, you'll work with me. No more resistance, no more games." Hargrove looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd met. There was no smugness in her expression, no trace of the condescension he'd accused her of earlier, just determination. And maybe, just maybe, a hint of understanding. "All right," he said quietly, almost reluctantly. "I'll do what I have to. But if this blows up in our faces, don't expect me to clean up your mess." Maya allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Fair enough. As they left the room together, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Hargrove still carried himself with his trademark swagger, but there was a newfound seriousness in his step. For the first time, Maya sensed a glimmer of respect, not because she had forced it out of him, but because she had given him space to confront his own fears. Later that day, armed with the new lead, Maya and Hargrove coordinated with the rest of the team to set up a sting operation near the outskirts of town. Using the information Hargrove had provided, they identified a meeting point where Jake and the suspects were likely to gather. This time, when Maya gave orders, Hargrove didn't argue. Instead, he followed her lead without question, his focus razor sharp. As the operation unfolded, the pieces fell into place. They caught two key suspects red-handed, along with damning evidence linking them to the string of hate crimes. When Jake was brought in for questioning, Hargrove insisted on being present, his loyalty to his family warring with his duty as an officer. It was messy, painful, and far from perfect, but it was progress. By the end of the day, the town buzzed with news of the arrests. Residents who had lived in fear for months began to breathe easier, and trust in law enforcement started to rebuild. And while Hargrove still had a long walk, the days following the arrests were a whirlwind of activity. The town buzzed with cautious optimism as news of the suspect's capture spread, and for the first time in months, people began to feel a glimmer of hope. But behind the scenes, tensions still simmered, especially between Maya and Deputy Hargrove. Though their working relationship had shifted slightly after the sting operation, there was no denying that deep-seated mistrust lingered on both sides. One evening, after most of the officers had left the station, Maya found herself alone in the dimly lit hallway. She was packing up her notes when she heard footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Hargrove walking toward her. His usual scowl softened into something closer to contemplation. He stopped a few feet away, hesitating as if unsure whether to speak. "What is it, Deputy?" Maya asked, her tone polite but guarded. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the floor before meeting her gaze. "I had wanted to say something. About earlier." Maya raised an eyebrow, surprised by his uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Go on." He took a deep breath, his voice quieter than usual. "Look, I know I've been hard on you since you got here, harder than I should have been. And maybe I let my pride get in the way of doing what's right." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't deserve that." Maya studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was raw honesty, a man grappling with his own shortcomings. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you for saying that. It means something." Hargrove exhaled sharply, as though relieved to have gotten the words out. Then, after a moment of silence, he added, "But I also want to understand how you stay so calm. All this time, I've been throwing everything I've got at you. Insults, doubt, resistance, and you never once lost your cool. Why?" Maya smiled faintly, leaning against the wall. "It's not easy, trust me. There have been plenty of times where I wanted to snap back or walk away altogether. But I'd learned over the years that reacting emotionally doesn't solve anything. People like you, they expect anger, they expect defensiveness, and giving them that reaction only proves their stereotypes true." Hargrove frowned, looking genuinely confused. "So what do you do instead?" "I listen," Maya replied simply. "I remind myself that everyone has their own struggles, their own fears. Sometimes those fears turn into hostility. When someone lashes out, it's not always about me. It's about them." Once I realized that, it became easier to rise above it. Her words hung in the air, giving Hargrove plenty to think about. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "I guess I've spent a lot of years letting fear run the show. Fear of change, fear of losing control." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Doesn't make it right, though." "No, it doesn't," Maya agreed, "but recognizing it is a start. You've already taken the first step by admitting it." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Finally, Hargrove spoke again, his voice softer now. "What made you choose this job? Knowing how hard it would be, for someone like you, I mean." Maya hesitated, caught off guard by the question. But then she straightened up, her expression thoughtful. "Because I believe in justice, not just for some people, but for everyone. Growing up, I saw how unfair the system could be. I saw friends and family treated differently because of the color of their skin. I didn't want to sit back and accept that. I wanted to fight for change, even if it meant facing resistance every single day." Hargrove listened intently, his usual bravado replaced by quiet reflection. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "That takes guts. More than I've shown, anyway." "You're stronger than you think," Maya said gently. "Change isn't easy for anyone, especially when it challenges who you are. But you're here now, trying. That counts for something." For the first time, Hargrove offered her a genuine smile, one free of sarcasm or bitterness. "Thanks, Agent Carter. For everything. As they parted ways that night, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, not because she'd solved the case or proven herself superior, but because she'd reached someone who had once seemed unreachable. In that moment, she realized that true justice wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about breaking down barriers, one person at a time. The final pieces of the investigation fell into place over the next few days. With Jake's cooperation and the evidence gathered during the sting operation, Maya and the team were able to build a solid case against the hate crime ring that had terrorized the town. What started as whispers of fear among residents turned into a chorus of relief as arrests mounted and justice steamed within reach. For the first time in months, the streets felt safer, and people began stepping out of their homes without looking over their shoulders. Hargrove played an unexpected but crucial role in tying up loose ends. Though he still struggled with moments of defensiveness, he threw himself into the work with a newfound determination. He accompanied Maya on follow-up interviews, helped coordinate efforts with other departments, and even volunteered to assist in community outreach programs aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and marginalized groups. It wasn't perfect. His old habits occasionally surfaced, but he was trying, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, after wrapping up another successful day of interrogations, Maya found herself sitting across from Sheriff Daniels in his office. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "You've done something remarkable here, Agent Carter," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "Not just solving the case, but bringing this department together. Even Hargrove's starting to come around." Maya chuckled softly, leaning forward. "He's not the only one who's grown. I've learned a lot too. This town has taught me patience and how much impact empathy can have when you least expect it." Sheriff Daniels nodded thoughtfully. "It takes courage to lead by example, especially when you're facing resistance every step of the way. You didn't just earn respect, you inspired change. That's rare." Before Maya could respond, there was a knock at the door. Deputy Hargrove stepped inside, holding a folder. His demeanor was different now, less confrontational, more respectful. "Sorry to interrupt, Sheriff," he said, glancing briefly at Maya. "Just wanted to drop off the latest report." "Thank you, Rick," Sheriff Daniels replied warmly. "And thank you for everything you've done these past few weeks. Your effort hasn't gone unnoticed." Hargrove shifted awkwardly, clearly unused to receiving praise. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, though a hint of pride crept into his voice. After a moment, he turned to Maya. "Agent Carter, I wanted to say thanks for pushing me, even when I didn't want to be pushed." Maya smiled, standing up to meet him. "You did the hard part, Deputy. Changing isn't easy, but you faced it head-on. That says a lot about your character." For once, Hargrove didn't argue or deflect. Instead, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before leaving the room. Watching him go, Maya felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She hadn't come here expecting to transform anyone's worldview, yet somehow she had managed to plant seeds of understanding in places where none seemed possible. As word of the arrests spread, the town held a small gathering to celebrate the breakthrough. Residents gathered in the park, sharing stories of hope and resilience, while local leaders spoke about unity and moving forward. Maya attended briefly, standing off to the side as she observed the crowd. Children played freely, parents laughed without tension, and for the first time, she saw smiles that weren't weighed down by fear. Later that evening, as Maya packed her belongings to return to headquarters, Hargrove approached her one last time. In his hands, he held a framed certificate, a formal apology issued by the department for its initial lack of cooperation. "We decided to make this public," he explained, handing it to her, "to show we're committed to doing better, not just for you, but for everyone." Maya accepted the gesture graciously, touched by the symbolism behind it. "This is a big step, Deputy. One that will mean a lot to the community." Hargrove shrugged modestly. "It's long overdue. And hey," he hesitated, then added with a faint grin, If you're ever back in town, maybe we can grab a cup of coffee. No arguing this time, I promise." Maya laughed, genuinely amused. "I'll hold you to that." With a final handshake, they parted ways, each carrying lessons from the journey they'd shared. As Maya drove away from the small southern town, she reflected on the challenges she'd faced and the victories, both big and small, that had defined her time there. Justice had been served, bridges had been built, and lives had been changed. But most importantly, she had reminded herself why she chose this path in the first place: to make a difference, no matter how difficult the road might be. Months passed, and life in the small southern town began to settle into a new rhythm. The arrests had sent shockwaves through the community, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and division. But with time came healing, slow and steady, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a long night. People who had once avoided one another now exchanged greetings on the street. Parents felt safe letting their children play outside again. And though scars remained, there was a collective determination to move forward together. Back at FBI headquarters, Maya Carter returned to her usual duties, but the case stayed with her. Not just because it had been challenging or high profile, but because it had reminded her of why she loved her work. Every file she reviewed, every suspect she pursued, it was all part of a larger mission to create a world where fairness outweighed fear. She often thought about Hargrove and the unlikely bond it formed during those tense weeks. Despite their rocky start, he had proven capable of growth, showing that even deeply ingrained biases could be challenged with patience and understanding. One afternoon, as Maya sat at her desk reviewing reports, an email notification popped up on her screen. It was from Sheriff Daniels, attaching a photo of the local police department's newly implemented diversity training program. In the picture, officers stood side by side with members of the community, smiling as they participated in workshops designed to foster mutual respect. At the center of the group was Deputy Hargrove, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. The caption read, "Building bridges, one step at a time." Maya couldn't help but smile. She forwarded the image to a few colleagues, adding a note, "Proof that change is possible when people are willing to listen." Her inbox quickly filled with replies praising her role in inspiring such progress. While Maya appreciated the recognition, she knew the real credit belonged to the town itself, for choosing to embrace change rather than resist it. A few days later, Maya received a handwritten letter in the mail. The envelope bore no official stamp, just a simple return address: Deputy Rick Hargrove. Intrigued, she opened it carefully. Inside was a short note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Agent Carter, I hope this finds you well. Things around here are different now. Not perfect, but better. Your visit left a mark on all of us, whether we realized it at the time or not. I'm still learning, still growing, but I owe a lot of that to you. Thanks for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Take care, and don't forget your promise to stop by for coffee if you're ever in town. Rick *. Maya read the letter twice, her chest swelling with pride and gratitude. For someone like Hargrove, a man so set in his ways, to acknowledge vulnerability and express gratitude was no small feat. It was proof that even the hardest hearts could soften with time and effort. As weeks turned into months, Maya continued to make waves in her field, tackling cases that demanded resilience and courage. Yet whenever she faced resistance or doubt, she remembered the lessons she'd learned in that small town. Empathy wasn't weakness, it was strength. Listening wasn't passive, it was transformative. And justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about uplifting communities and building trust where none existed before. Years later, when Maya was invited to speak at a national law enforcement conference, she chose to share the story of her time in the southern town. Standing on stage, she recounted the challenges, the triumphs, and the unexpected friendships that had shaped her journey. Change doesn't happen overnight, she told the audience, her voice steady and sincere. It starts with small acts of courage, choosing to listen instead of argue, to understand instead of judge. And sometimes, it begins with two people who couldn't be more different deciding to meet halfway. The room erupted in applause, but Maya's mind drifted back to Hargrove and the others who had taught her that redemption was always within reach. Justice, she realized, wasn't just about solving crimes. It was about leaving the world a little better than you found it. And in that quiet, unassuming town, she had done exactly that.